Okay, welcome to this webinar on 7 essential questions to answer before restarting your business, essentially around COVID. This is part of the Elevate Growth and Recovery Business Futures webinar series, total of 7 resilience-themed webinars that we've put together. This is the 4th of the 7, and each is about an hour and a half, each is about an hour in length, and we're delivering them every other week on a Wednesday afternoon at 1:30, but they're recorded, and you'll probably listen to this on a recording available on the BizSmart YouTube channel. We'll also be sending out an ebook, so there's an ebook ready for you to download, or there will be from this recording afterwards, for anybody that would like it, who attends live or requests it afterwards. Over the course of the 7 webinars, we're exploring practical ways to build resonance into our businesses and to rebuild the value that we may have lost. But it's a little bit more than that, and on some of the other webinars you'll have heard me make reference to the idea of, if your house burnt down or was severely damaged, would you rebuild the house in exactly the same way, or would you take the opportunity to build your dream home? And it's essentially the same idea that we're trying to look at with our businesses. We've got potentially a once-in-a-lifetime chance, in a way, to actually reset and start and rebuild the kind of business that we would like, one that is perhaps less reliant on us as the owner, maybe more fun to run, and potentially and ideally certainly be worth something in the long run, whilst enabling us to keep control over the business and to deliver the kind of profitability that we're looking for, and hopefully have some fun along the way. I'm going to take this opportunity to say that we had a few technical issues when we ran this webinar live, so you'll notice that at the moment there's nobody else on board with this webinar. As we get about halfway through, you'll see that we change over, and Louise will pick up the reins, where we were able to then record the last half of the webinar. In fact, the meat of the webinar, really, record Louise delivering that. And you'll see that we've got various other people that were on that call, and we're interacting with them through some of the chats. But at the minute, this is recorded without an audience, this first part. Now, most businesses over time, and we see this time and time again with businesses as they evolve from maybe being a one-man band to then having a team of 3 to 5 and growing up beyond there, they evolve into a kind of a patchwork of products and services, probably serving a mishmash of customers. And that's perfectly normal. It's what happens when we start a business. Although we know what we're about, we might be an IT provider, or we might be a graphic designer, and we're focusing on that kind of work, we end up doing a range of products and services within that, and some of which we're great at, and some of which we're perhaps not so great at, maybe we're more average at, some of which are really scalable and potentially valuable products and services, and some possibly are not. So we end up with this mishmash, a patchwork of products and services, and there may only be some of those that are truly scalable and truly add value to our company. And that's partly because of the #1 immutable law of business valuation, and it goes hand in hand with scalability. But business valuation is essentially around the fact that an acquirer is not going to pay for something they can do themselves. Or we put it another way, an acquirer will only pay a premium for a business when it would take too long, or it would cost too much to build it on their own. So that's what they're after. So if we're building the kind of business that actually doesn't provide something that is unique in that way, or help a potential acquirer, then we're not building something of value. And if we look at how the typical business owner might value their business, so what do you think your business is worth? And we had a little look at this in the last webinar. We looked at the idea of multiples when we looked at the last webinar on 5 surprising ways to build value in your business. And if you're like a lot of business owners, to answer that question, you've probably got in mind a multiple that you've heard. It might be a multiple of EBITDA, net profits, or it might even be a multiple of revenue, but you probably heard that in your industry seems to be kind of what the average business is worth. And in this example I'm going to take you through, it's a hypothetical example to illustrate a point, but let's say this business has £5 million worth of revenue, and once we take all the various things out, it ends up with a profit before tax of around 800,000. Let's assume that the business owner has heard that in their sector, they can apply a multiple of 4 times EBITDA or times net profits, roughly equivalent, to give the value of the business, and that would lead to a valuation of about 3.2 million, my advanced mathematics skills tell me. Now that may or may not be fair enough, but what actually, from the acquirer point of view, what happens is the typical acquirer may look at that business in quite a different way. And remember, based on that immutable law that I've just said, an acquirer will only value the sales that you make from products and services that they would find difficult essentially to replicate, or that they would find difficult to compete with, and they're adding a time frame on that as well as a value of how long it would take them to get to that point. So it might be that in this hypothetical example that the company has 4 products in total, 3 of which are essentially commodity products, and the potential acquirer is going to look at these and he's going to think, he's going to assess how well each product or service is differentiated and how difficult it would be to compete with those. And then maybe product D they think is differentiated, and that's the one they're going to add the value to. They may even completely discount the value of the others. So that's one reason why, if you think about it, now is the right time to reassess what you've been doing and look at it through the lens of an acquirer. Because if we're trying to build something of value, we've got to take into account what the potential acquirer might be looking at it. And in this particular case, then that potential acquirer might say, well, I'm only interested in differentiated product D. That's turning over, providing revenue rather, of 400,000. I'm prepared to pay a multiple of revenue for that, but only maybe 2 times, or maybe even 3 times if we're lucky. But in 2 times, that's going to give a value of 800,000, which compares with the 3.2 million that the seller thought their business was worth. Now, as I say, this is hypothetical. It's a made-up example. But if you have ever even thought about acquiring another business, you'll know that this is true. If you started down the path of looking at acquiring another business, you'll know exactly what I mean. There will have been, when that company that you looked at, there will have been a mix of revenue within there, mix of clients, all sorts of things, and you'll have been automatically thinking, what, those are more valuable than those. That's what I really want. If I buy this company, that's the bit I want. I don't really want some of these things over here. So you're not going to pay a premium, certainly for those. You may even not want to pay for them at all. And I've had this come up very recently, literally in the last 2 or 3 weeks, with 2 separate companies. One was a potential acquirer and one was a potential vendor. And they're both having a struggle with the opposite party of seeing things in the same way. So, for example, one was an IT company looking at buying another IT company, managed service company. This managed service company had revenues of around about £300,000. So not huge, but a reasonable size turnover. But only 120,000 of that was in the managed service product types of clients. So that's the recurring revenue bit, the bit that's a bit more guarantee, the bit that's harder to find. The rest of that 300,000, so 180,000, was in ad hoc sales, much less predictable, less profitable too, and not contracted in any way. So the potential acquirer was really only interested in the 120K's worth of revenue, or the clients, if you like, that go with that are on contract, because he knows that they're likely to stick, they're recurring, they're likely to be there next year. And also he knows that he can probably upsell from those, but all of the other non-contracted revenue was not something that they particularly wanted. So, as I say, if you've been down that route, you'll understand what we're getting at here. And essentially, there are a number of things that a potential acquirer is looking for, things that they would add the value to, they would ascribe the value to. And we've got 8 key ones here that you may well be able to think of more, but there's 8 key things here that we think are really useful things or things that a potential acquirer is going to add value to. Number one is if you've got distribution channels that would be hard to build or replicate. So if you've locked up a distribution channel of some sort, you've got a really good presence within that channel, that's a really good thing to have. A brand that customers are loyal to. If you've built up a really strong name for your service or for your company, a really strong brand, we can all think of great examples of brands where actually it's the brand that's worth more than the company in fact, because it really stands for something that people want to be associated with. Fantastic. Maybe it's a customer base that would take time to earn. So let's just go back to that IT example, the managed service provider example, where they've got those people on the managed service contract, on the recurring revenue. They're hard to get. It's hard to wrestle an existing customer away from a supplier without something, unless something's gone drastically wrong. So it's hard to grow organically. So they're a prized commodity, a rare commodity. A strategic location might also be important. It might be that a company wants to use you as a bridgehead to get into a different geographical location. So sometimes it's a location itself, where you're either where you're based or where your main customers are. That sometimes can be something that people are prepared to pay for. Perhaps a proprietary technology that would be difficult to imitate. Maybe employees that are hard to recruit, particularly in certain sectors where highly skilled employees maybe are the scarce resource, really hard to do. If you've managed to put together a pool of these hard to find employees, then again, that can be something that that potential acquirer would be interested in having. Obviously, if you've got a differentiated product or service and you've really got that marketing position unique, and you've got to a degree that monopoly control that you may have heard us talk about at times, then that can be really useful too. And finally, you might have an organic search ranking. Built that up over time, and you've got to something that's really powerful that can be leveraged to generate more business. So those are 8 key things that an acquirer might look at and think that's attractive if we built those within the company. So there may be things to think about. Have we got those in our business? Are we building those? What can we do to build more of those? Take Claire Vale, for example, the local business. Claire is the MD for a company called Sign Solutions. They're based in Alvechurch in Redditch, not far from here. It's in the West Midlands for any of you that are perhaps not familiar with this part of the country. And Sign Solutions are a leading provider of what they term as innovative interpreting services, enabling deaf and hearing people to communicate. So essentially it's around British Sign Language, around the signing idea, or around the signing service. They're providing interpreters to be able to do that. And they've recently secured a 6-figure investment for a minority stakeholding from a venture capital company called Midben. And it's a company based around Birmingham. And that was to help Sign Solutions to scale. That's what the investment was for. But what did Midben see in Sign Solutions? Well, it came down largely to a combination of a couple of things. One, those highly prized and difficult to come by NHS contracts that Sign Solutions had got, because they do a lot of work with the NHS, along with their reputation for video interpreting services, which has the potential to be a big part of the market. And that's enabled Sign Solutions to grow from just over £1 million turnover to just under 2 million in a relatively short period of time. Similar story with David Lyons and his company Unique IQ, which he set up a few years ago, originally as a web design and software development agency. And initially, the majority of the business was based around bespoke websites and bespoke software. A few years ago, they began to focus on their remote working software product that they developed as part of that work. And that product was aimed in particular at cleaning and home care sectors. And they've now grown from a turnover of around $250,000, 250,000 to well over 1.5 million. And they've secured significant investment again from Midben, again with the minority stake, because of the strength of their differentiated position through their technology and the size of the potential opportunity. And by the way, along the way, they've they've completely reversed the proportion of ad hoc to recurring revenue. So a few years ago, they were basically 90% ad hoc. Now they're 90% recurring revenue. So they've created a much more stable, predictable revenue and much more valuable, because those recurring revenue clients will carry a much greater value than the ad hoc clients that they had before. So all of that's really to say that now is the time, before you restart your business, or before you may never have stopped, and you may already count that you've restarted, but really before you get completely sucked back into doing things exactly the way you're doing them before and just doing more of the same, now's the time to really think about some of these things and think about, is that the kind of business that I really want to build? So it might be that you want to prune some of the products and services that are sucking your resources and complicating your life, but maybe not really adding very much value to the business. And that's what David Lyons did a few years ago, as I've just described. So in fact, now is that once in a generation opportunity that I mentioned earlier, to refocus your business, to refocus what you're doing with your business on offering something that acquirers will ultimately value. Not saying you're going to be selling, but something that will build the value of the business. It will also help you to scale that business in a way that means you've got a much more manageable, much more controllable business that is more fun to run. So the first step to doing that, in line with some of the other webinars that we've done before, and we will do coming up in this series, is to answer 7 critical questions. And we're going to go through them one by one in a moment, and you'll hear Louise largely taking us through those as we now shift to the second part of the recording. And what we asked our audience to do was to write down in the chat part of the room their answers as we went along, and I'll read out some of those as we go. What we'll also do is we'll circulate a template afterwards, if you want to contact us and ask us for it, that we ask all of our Value Bootcamp clients, that's a service that we have, we ask them to complete that in preparation for the first session. And it includes these 7 questions along with 1 or 2 others. Now, I doubt very much if any of these questions are going to be completely new to you. We may ask them in a slightly different way from what you've heard before, but they're probably not going to be completely new. But what I encourage you to do is to give them proper thought, because there are often things that we gloss over and go, yeah, I know what that is. And perhaps particularly, actually, if you've been in business for a number of years, you may well have just got into the habit of just thinking that's the way we've always done it, or that's how we would answer that question. But really try and dig beneath the surface of it and think about it a little bit. And then also to look at them as a series of these 7 questions, not necessarily just in isolation, because your answers together effectively make up the narrative for your strategy, and they'll form the starting point for when you look at creating your 90-day plan towards, and we'll do that a little bit towards the end of this series, but right back at the first webinar, we talked about how important it is to take action. And not to the fact that motivation, desire isn't enough. We have to really take action, get it written down, and take that action. And that's what the 90-day planning is about. So this first question is of rebuilding our vision starts with the problem that your business is uniquely set up to solve, or put it a slightly different way, what problems are you trying to solve for your customer? And essentially this is the why question. Why do we do what we do? And it's different from what we do, and that's one of the questions a little bit later. It needs to get to the nub of the pain that we're taking away for our customers. So why is that important? Because, this is what we do. Why is that important? So what? What difference does that make? And if we think about Claire's example with Sign Solutions, they're taking away the pain for their customers of not being able to communicate between hard of hearing and non-hard of hearing people. And also for organizational bodies like the NHS that they do a lot of work for, they're helping the NHS to address the accessibility requirements that have been brought in over the last few years, and they have to demonstrate that they are accessible to all people, including the hard of hearing. And one of the additional pains that they solve is relevant to the video, particularly, is having to wait for an interpreter to arrive. So a lot of their business originally was face to face. They would book an appointment for an interpreter to come, and there's some pros and cons with that. But now what they can do is provide everything via video. So they've got a bank of people that are there. Almost, they can set up an appointment within 5 minutes instead of having to wait for an interpreter to be available and to get there. So via video, it's almost instantaneous, and so that's one of the pains that they are solving there. So, secondly, then, what we're looking at here is who is most affected by this problem. So, who feels this problem most acutely? So, effectively, we're saying who is our avatar? What's our client avatar? The more specific we can be in terms of painting this picture, the better. So, for Science Solutions, again, it's the hard of hearing as the end user, but it's also organisations like the NHS. In fact, one of our challenges, or one of their challenges, is to define the focus sectors as the ones that they really want to focus on, because you could argue that any organisation can have difficulty dealing with hard of hearing customers. So, so the more specific that Science Solutions can be, the better, which is why they really focus down on the NHS. Why they focus down on the NHS, excuse me. For Unique IQ, it's home care organisations with a certain number of remote carers, and also similarly for cleaning companies. So they're nice and specific. There's a few more metrics around that they have as well about the size. And so the more specific that you can be about your target customer, the ideal customer for whom that problem is felt most acutely, then the more likely it is that we're going to be able to build some strong differentiation around those and get on and take on more and more customers and penetrate that market.
So a couple of minutes to think about that one.
Okay, and while you're doing that, Joe added into the previous question, helping businesses communicate with their customers and prospects in an imaginative, efficient, and engaging way. So I think one of the things, actually just going back to that one, is don't forget to keep asking why. So if we said to Joe there, okay, so why is that important? Then Joe would come back with another answer there. And if we ask why or so what a few times, then we actually get to the nub of why you're in business, what problems you're trying to solve, but why is that important? Sorry, it was just going back a little bit, but
no, that's fine. And you're absolutely right, Kevin, because I do spend a lot of time talking to people about one of my very favorite management tools, which is the 5 whys, which is exactly that. And it is about root cause analysis. It's about getting to the bottom of what is really important, as opposed to the first why, where you often get a sort of scratch the surface answer. By the time you've asked it 3, 4, or even 5 times, you should have got to the nub of the problem. So don't stop with one. Okay. Anybody coming up with great?
So we've got
sectors.
Peter has said, we deal with clients who don't have the time or resource and then report on these things where Excel is the only option, and these teams' main skill is not IT, it's automotive quality departments. Okay, good. Oh, sorry, I overlapped there. Sorry, because another one came in actually. So I've read 2. That was a combination of 2 people. So let me do Peter's again. Peter's properly. I got Peter and Mark Nash. That's a combined effort from the 2 of them there, but different businesses. So Peter, we deal with clients who don't have the time or resource to analyze their own problems or need an independent party to give the extra expertise or take the blame. And Mark says teams that record things, manage these things, and then report on these things where Excel is the only option. And these teams' main skill is not IT, automotive quality departments are his target audience. Okay. Good.
So I think we're stuck. Yeah. Go on.
There's nobody else. Oh, Ian Richards. Businesses do lots of different things, but don't necessarily know which bits give them the greatest reward. Okay, so is that Ian? Is that a definition of who's most affected by the problem you mentioned, or is that? Yeah. So
No, that's more the problem rather than
yeah.
who's defined by it.
Okay. Good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, think here. So this is about taking. Okay. So what is the problem you're trying to solve, but who's most affected by this problem? So it's part of the value proposition. Those of you that are familiar with things like value proposition, and again, as Louise is saying, the more specific that we can be, then the more that really helps us to identify exactly what their pains are. It's sort of a bit of a going backwards and forwards, and then working out exactly how we can communicate and address that target audience. If we're vague, it's like, it's this, those of you that know about BNI and networking, it's that idea of specific is terrific. The more specific that we can be about who it is that we're trying to solve the problems for and what those problems are, then the easier it is really to define everything that comes from there and make sure that we can build a differentiated positioning that resonates with the client.
Okay, excellent. So I think we're probably starting to get the idea of how this works. So let's move on to the next question. And that is, what does your company do to solve this problem? Now, anybody who knows me knows that I am a great proponent of the KISS principle. And this is a classic example of this. So describe in the simplest terms possible how your company solves this problem for the people who experience it. So you've defined your problem, you've identified an ideal customer, and again, moving on with the sort of value proposition idea. But keep it simple, please. That would be KISS, not KISS, by the way. This is essentially the what you do bit. It should be straightforward, but really do think about this. Really do think about this quite carefully, and also think about it from the point of view of the customer's language. I've lost count of the number of times that I've dealt with companies, particularly those who deal with very technical things, who describe their what you do's in their own language, which is fine because they understand exactly what they're talking about. But a lot of times customers, or more importantly potential customers, really struggle to understand what it is. So what does your company do to solve the problem? Look out for things that you do that are not directly in line with your earlier answers as well. Okay, so just think a little bit wider. If you do end up with a long list of products or services, then going on to what we're going to do in the next question, but also going back to what I said earlier in the presentation, which is, really look at them and analyze them and be very, very clear about, are they unique and differentiated? Are they really valuable to your business? Or are they actually just those run-of-the-mill things that you happen to have picked up along the way? Okay. Any initial thoughts from people there, Kevin, about what they do to solve the problem?
Yeah, I mean, people are welcome to put things in the chat box. Essentially, this is one of the more simple bits because this is basically what products and services do you do. So it's a relatively straightforward one, I think, because it's the what you do, and it's the one that normally as business owners we're very good at describing what we do. It's some of the other questions that are a bit harder, but we've got Mark. Ian says that he says to his clients, I don't want to talk to you about your website. I want to talk to you about your business, customers, competitors, contact strategy. And then we've got Mark replaces spreadsheets with simple software that works in the same way that you work. Kate towards Charles, planting plants. She says planting plans, but I think planting plants. Clive, tell them the story in their own language. Peter Francis, we identify, communicate, and solve engineering process problems in understandable language.
I'd actually like to hear from Kate, because Kate might actually mean planting plans, as in planning where you plant things. You see, this is where being very clear about it's quite a really good example there of how you can read different things into things. Kevin's obviously read planting plans and thought plants, and I've gone, is this to do with planting plans, i.e. making sure that you are planting the plant
and Louise,
the right place?
Louise, you're absolutely right, because Kate's come back to say that's the case. She does mean planting plans and a specific scale plan to give to a landscaper. So excellent, thank you, Louise. Clive also says tell them a story in their own language. Peter's added, we identify, communicate and solve engineering problems in understandable language. Yeah. Yeah. And Peter said, and is it the planting the idea of a plan? Back to Kate. I think that one could run and run.
but I have to say thank you very much, Kate, for giving us a really good way of looking at this, because you've got to look at it and then see how other people might view it, and then just make sure that it is clear to other people what it is you're meaning. Okay, perfect. So let's move on to the next question then. And that is, what gives you an enduring competitive advantage? So this is all about describing why you are uniquely set up to solve this problem. So in other words, what gives you an unfair advantage over the competition? Okay, so this is, I have to say, this is something we do need to work with businesses. Try that again. Something we do need to work on with business owners we work with. I think I'm beginning to lose it, Kevin. So that without a strong why and strong differentiation and competitive advantage, it's very difficult to scale. Okay, you need both of those in order to really successfully scale, and not just scale on the basis of just the same old. So what this is a combination of what makes you different or unique with what gives you a competitive advantage. Okay, so this can be one or a combination of the following. It can be the sector or market that you focus on. It can be the offer advantage. So what is it about your offer that enables you to win against your competition? But it can also be your cost advantage. So what are you advantaged from a cost perspective? How can you make the higher profits at the same price as your competition does? So three key things: sector or market you focus on, the offer advantage, or your cost advantage. And the combination of these three things, if you get it right, will enable you to make superior profits when compared with your competition. It's kind of logical. And on the back of that, you should either be able to grow your market share at the same price as them, or at least maintain the market share at a higher price, so therefore being more profitable. Sometimes referred to as your X factor, for those of you who like X factor, or even your secret sauce. Although I do understand that KFC's secret sauce is not so secret anymore, having watched a program the other day.
So
okay.
You may want to put stuff in here if it's something that's confidential to you and you don't want your competitors to know about, then I suggest you don't put it in at the moment.
Well, feel free to answer the question on your own template.
But I can give you an example, I think, of somebody I was talking to this morning, fun enough, and I won't mention the company name, but some of you may know them. They do telephony systems, but instead of just being a reseller, they've built their own platform, which enables them to have an offer advantage because actually it's better than BT legacy systems, but it also gives a cost advantage, and because they're combined with the sector, because they're working with business owners and small businesses. And what it means is that potentially they could actually acquire another telephony company that's got legacy BT system clients on legacy BT systems, and migrate them across to their platform, which not only is better from an offer advantage, but actually would then enable the company to make higher profits, as in the telecom company that I'm talking about, higher profits than the competitor they bought. So they're instantly adding value all around. So that's their secret sauce, is effectively their technology platform, or their X factor. That's what gives them a unique competitive advantage. But for all of us, it will be something different. So it'd be great if people put things in here, but equally, as I say, if it's something that's that you don't want to share with your competitors, fully understand that. But what have we got here? So let's have a look. John Heseltine says, quickly provides a solution for any change scenario / business sectors impacting people in any way. Okay. Mark says 10 years of working closely with automotive quality departments where many software developers fear to tread. So we've coded many of the requirements for other customers. Yes, so knowing what Mark does, he's got that combination of real strong experience within the automotive sector. He knows them inside out, and he knows what their needs are in the quality departments particularly. So he's got a nice niche there, that really his X factor is that what makes him, gives him that advantage compared with other people that might do software type development or process improvement aspects on that, is that he really understands their requirements. Okay, for that particular sector. Good.
Perfect.
So definitely think about that. It's a really important one, this competitive advantage, because if we want to build a business that is truly scalable and we don't have a competitive advantage, then it's really quite difficult to do that beyond a certain point.
Okay. So, having looked at the competitive advantage, what does the world look like when you've solved the problem? So, as you're looking into the future, how will the world look when you've solved the problem you're embarking on attacking? So, this is an interesting one. If you think of Claire, then it would be that every hard of hearing person has instant access to a British Sign Language interpreter at no cost to them. Now, it's no cost to them, and if you remember, we were talking about the two different types of markets, of customers, sorry, two different types of customers in this particular case. But interestingly, the hard of hearing people, you know, the more they talk about the need for British Sign Language, the more they talk about the positive experience that they've had with Sign Solutions, for instance, the more it is likely that they will get an even more enhanced reputation in the market and access to new markets. That makes sense. Kevin, would you like to add anything to that? No.
I was on mute, just conscious of the time a little bit.
Yeah, I was also conscious of that, and I was just having an absolute fit because I thought my computer had shut down.
So this is an interesting one, because I think this can help you. Not only can it help you in terms of communicating with people, you know, at an individual level to your customers as to, you know, what their world will look like when you've solved their problem, but actually from the bigger picture point of view is when if you are able to make a significant impact, what does the world or what does your sector look like generally if you've solved the problem, helps you sometimes to think about your vision and your stretch goals as to where you're trying to get to. So, you know, if you really are trying to impact a certain percentage of that customer sector, what would it look like? How would that have improved the lives for the business owners or your particular client? So it's an interesting one to do that. A little bit harder to get your head around, but Claire's the example that Louise used about Claire is a nice one with the British Sign Language. That's what she's trying to get to, particularly within the NHS, but actually arguably within any organisation. If you're hard of hearing and you walk into any organisation, whether it be a retail outlet or whatever it might be, that you have no problem in communicating with the people in there to get what you need.
Okay. And I particularly put a lot of store by the next question, which is, how will you know when you've solved the problem? So in other words, what's your mission? This is about measurement. You know, how will you measure success? How will you know when you've actually achieved what it is you were looking for? So what quantitative, objective yardsticks will you use to know when your mission is complete? Where are you headed and by when? So I think, you know, for those of you who've worked with us in any kind of detail will know that this business of actually setting a goal and actually setting out how you will measure that, how you will know when you've succeeded, is really quite important. So what quantitative, objective yardsticks will you use to know when your mission is complete? Yeah. Any final comments on that, Kevin, before I move on?
No comments there for the minute.
Okay, well, that's excellent. So conscious of time, I mean, I did say we might overrun by a couple of minutes. So I think we're on time because this is the last question. The last question in the set that you need to think of course, is the million-dollar question. How will you make money? So Kevin talked about the value proposition earlier, but this also really resonates with the hedgehog. So for those of you who've heard us talk about the hedgehog, which is, you know, what do you do well, what are you really good at? Sorry, what are you passionate about? What are you really good at? And what's your profit engine? So how will you make money? What is your business model that generates a sustainable cash flow? So when you're looking at the financial model, it clearly needs to make sense. If you had a wide range of products and services, which ones make the most sense from the combination of this TVR test? So for those of you who are on the previous webinars, you may recall the TVR exercise. Essentially, to be scalable and valuable, you want to focus on the products and services that have the highest combination of being teachable, T, so not reliant on you as the only one that can do it. So how widely can you spread the teaching within your company? Valuable, by which we mean differentiated and for which you have a competitive advantage. And repeatable. So there's a strong recurring element or a repeat element to it. So that's the TVR, teachable, valuable, repeatable. So if we have a truly differentiated offer position, then we should be able to charge a premium price and still at least maintain the market share. Or if we charge the same price, we should be able to outgrow the market growth because we're making more money on it. If we're going for a cost advantage position, we should be able to make superior profits than our competitors at the same price. So whichever way you cook it, your business model will be tied back to your competitive advantage. And it's about that clarity. You know, it's about being brutally honest with your business. It's about taking that step back and looking amongst the trees to find the little pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, to mix my metaphors. So how will you make money is the million-dollar question. Okay.
Yeah. Or how do you? And if you go back to that, one of those questions before about what is it that you do, and if you ended up with a long list of products and services as to what you do, then doing that TVR exercise is a really good way of helping you to see which ones are likely to be most scalable for you and beneficial for you in terms of trying to scale up your business and making a consistent and reliable return.
Perfect. So Mel, next slide. So this is the template we referred to earlier, the Vision Builder template, a really useful tool that we use with a lot of our clients. So if you'd like a copy, just let us know. If you're on the Elevate program and would like to include it, just let your advisor know. In many cases, they'll be going through a number of these things, but maybe not quite in this structured fashion. So it's actually quite a useful document and tool, just to really give you a snapshot, because getting all your thoughts and ideas out on a piece of paper, you know, numbers of times people say, oh, well, I know what I'm doing and I know how I'm doing it. That's great. But you also need to be able to communicate that effectively, not just to potential customers and your existing customers, but to the rest of the people in your organization too, so that they can also do it. That's spreading the love. So that's all for today. If you remember what we said right at the beginning, now is a great time to take stock of these questions before you get sucked back in and dragged along with the tide. So really do take the time to look at those questions and consider how that might look. Okay, I think I finally and almost successfully made it to the end of the webinar. So that was today's webinar, 7 essential questions to answer before restarting your company. 2 weeks today is the next webinar, which will be around 8 steps for turning your service into a product. So if you're interested in looking at how to productize your service, please join us in 2 weeks' time at 1:30. Thank you for your patience, everybody.
That's excellent. I would really like to thank Louise and Mel, and in terms of picking that up for me last minute. So that looked like a fantastic job, Louise, with basically negative notice. I mean, you didn't even get any advance warning whatsoever. It was after the event. So superb. Thank you very much for Louise in doing that. And I know Mel was also helping very much with the coordinated approach of managing the slides and making sure that we got the notes and everything there as well. So yeah, so on behalf of everybody, I'd like to thank you very much, Louise, and Mel, for picking that up so quickly and so brilliantly.
Thank you, Kevin. I shall go away now and just
have a lie down, in the dark and
have a lie down in a darkened room.
Are there any questions that people have got before we close completely?
I think we've pummeled them all into submission.
Well, we've got a couple of good comments. Can you see the comments now, Louise?
I can see the comments now. Hang on.
Yeah, so Joe's. Yeah, you like Joe's. Yeah, and Karen's. Yeah.
Well, actually, just to let everybody know, I stopped counting at 32, so I'm perpetually 32. But thank you, Karen. I feel younger every day.
Very good.
Great. Well, hopefully, for those of you who are on the Elevate program, we'll all be in touch. For those who aren't, get in touch with us, and we'll work with you in any way we can. And see you in 2 weeks' time.